R. Hillman.
What is your birth date?
4/18/24.
And where do you live?
Pardon?
Where do you live?
Where do I live? I live, what, I don't know what the official name of this place is, but it's apartments for people that sold their home and and my wife died, so I was all by myself. So that this was a good place to go, because here I'm taken good care of, and they make eat all my meals here, and I have a good place to stay.
And for those that don't know, what city is it in? What town?
Yeah, in Warren, Minnesota. Yeah.
Which war did you fight in?
World War II.
What branch of service were you in?
In the United States Marine Corps.
What was your rank?
Private first class.
And where did you serve?
Where? I started, of course, went to Minneapolis and got inducted. And then I went from there to San Diego for boot camp. And when I went in, was in 1942. In 1942, and I was working for a farmer here in Warren, and well, in fact, I was born in Warren, and I lived here all my life. But at the time, I was working for a farmer, so it's Annebeck farmed this land just west of town. So I was working for him till in the fall when we finished combining. Then I was drafted into the service. And when I got to St. Paul, where I had my physical, I was in good shape, and I was accepted, and I had a choice of the Army, Navy, or Marine Corps. And at the time I thought I'd never been any place besides Warren, Minnesota, and I thought it would be fun to go to California. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I went through boot camp in Camp Pendleton, California, and that's located between Los Angeles and San Diego. And I went to boot camp there for 6 weeks, and then I was transferred to Hawaii. There I was, and in Hawaii I was doing guard duty for prisoners, and this was in May, I think May of 44. I went in November 2nd, 1943. And so then I was doing guard duty in Corps base in Hawaii, I guess, in Hawaii, till because no, December 7th is when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and they did a lot of damage. So then the U.S. got involved, and they were building ships, and they built, the one they built that I was on was the Intrepid, and it was a big aircraft carrier, and it was very big, 900 feet long. It had to be long so the airplanes could land on it. And well, going back to, I was doing guard duty in Marine Corps base in Hawaii, and then when the ship was ready to sail, and they loaded it up, and there were 5 of us Marines that were loaded on, and we were not the ship's company. We were Rear Admiral Bogan, his name was, and he was in charge of the 3rd Fleet. So we took turns standing guard for him in his office, and his office was close to the headquarters on the ship. And then we went out to sea, and then, well, things were pretty bad then. It was a lot of ships going up, going out, and a lot of fighting going on. Iwo Jima was one of the worst battles for the Marine Corps. They lost hundreds of men. It was very bad. It was very sad. But I was on the aircraft carrier, and I'm thinking about the date. It was around Thanksgiving. For 1944, that we were getting close to Japan, but the Japanese airplanes, they'd come and bomb our aircraft carriers, because the aircraft carrier was their worst enemy, because we had airplanes on it, and we could take off and go and bomb Japan. Well, we were still not close enough for them to come out and bomb us, because their airplanes did not have enough gas so they could come out to bomb us and get back to Japan again. So then, to do any damage to our ship, to ships like the aircraft carrier, the aircraft carriers were the ones that had all the airplanes on it. They were in the center of the fleet, and Rear Admiral Bogan was my superior officer, and he was in charge of the fleet. He was in charge of all the ships that was in the Pacific, and there was lots of them. And the aircraft carrier is the one that the Japanese tried the hardest to get rid of, because we had about 100 planes on it that could reach over and bomb those islands around Japan. And well, we were too far away from them, so they couldn't carry enough gasoline in their bombers to reach us and get back again. So then what they did, they formed, or they decided that they formed the kamikazes. And what they did is they flew out and bombed us. They didn't have enough gas to get home. So when they left Japan, they knew they were dead because they couldn't get back. They didn't have enough gas. But they were very effective. They would dive into us, and they were dead when they hit us, of course. Well, on Thanksgiving in it was over in this would be 44. Anyway, we were attacked by Japanese kamikazes, or suicide divers, and I wasn't on duty with the admiral at the time, but I was when one of us 5 was on duty, then we were either one was with the admiral and the rest of us were on aircraft guns. And well, we were under attack, and there was lots of those kamikazes. So they just flew in, and it was hard to see them because you had to look up into the sun, and it was hard to spot them. And of course, they would get up there, and they would just come down, straight down at us. So we had to try to hit them with our anti-aircraft from the ship. Well, I was on one side, and all of a sudden, right across from me I should back up a little bit here. When the planes took off from the aircraft carrier, they went, of course, are loaded with gas and bombs, and the fighter planes took off first, and then there was so many planes on the flight deck that they would shoot the first fighter planes off by air pressure, and they would just like that, and they'd go right from 0 to 100 miles an hour when they're up in the air. And then when they got a little more room, then they would fly off. They would just take off and fly, and then take off. The fighter planes would get off first. The bombers were second. The third ones were heavier. I can't think of the name. This would be in 1944. Mm-hmm. And this is in 1944 when I was aboard the USS Intrepid, and we were under attack. And it was, of course, I don't know how many Japanese airplanes it was, but they attacked us, and they would get up into the sun, and then they'd come and dive at us, and it was hard for us to see them for one thing, and then they were coming right at us, and the only thing we could do is hit them with a shell from an anti-aircraft gun, so that it would just nick them a little bit, so they'd miss us. And but they didn't all miss us. And this one hit just across from where my battle station was, and he hit the deck and he slid on for a ways, and then went right over the edge, right across from me. But he was knocked out of it, and there he laid on the flight deck dead, but the plane tipped over and went into the water. Well, time went on, and we were taking a beating because it was so many of those planes, and they somewhat hit us and some didn't. And I had a set of radio earphones on, and it came over that prepared to abandon ship because we were burning pretty bad. We were on fire, and we had so much gasoline up on our ship for all these airplanes that we had to have gasoline for them, so that we had a lot of gasoline in the tanks. And that's of course what they wanted to get. They wanted to get a fire going so that it would hit those gas tanks. Of course, that we would have blown up for sure. But as time went on, then it came over my radio, my earphones, prepare to abandon ship, because we were burning pretty bad, and we had so many kamikaze airplanes had smashed into us. And I looked over the side, and I looked down, and the flight deck was the top where the airplanes took off from, and that was 90 feet above the water. So I looked over the side, and all I could see was fire. The water was burning and everything, because when the kamikaze planes would smash, of course they had gasoline in them. Well, then the gasoline would start fire, so we were in pretty bad shape. So that it came over my radio that prepare to abandon ship. And but we kept on, and then the bombing stopped, because all those airplanes had smashed into us, and they had not gotten fire in our gasoline supply, and we had a lot of gasoline for all the airplanes. So we were still going, and then everything got quiet. No planes above us, and we got. Then that battle was over. Well, when it was over, then of course, but then we were still going. We were still going good. Where our ship was going, so we headed straight back for Pearl Harbor. And then we went from Pearl Harbor to San Diego. And then I went home for 30 days, and I went back and went right back in the Pacific the second time on the USS Randolph. And that was the same type of a ship as the Intrepid. And so then I know I had kind of a scary experience when I was on this destroyer, or I guess it was a destroyer, and then they transferred me from there to the Randolph then, because the admiral was under Randolph, and I was part of his group, and so then they put a life jacket on me, and they then they shot a rope across to the carrier from where I was. They shot a little rope first, and then they pulled over, and then they got a big rope, and then they put me in a seat, and and then they put me, and it was a roller on it, so then it was just like I got a ride then from between the two ships, and of course, you know, in the water, nothing is steady. Everything is going back and forth, and I was sitting there riding that thing across, and I was thinking, I hope this rope holds. Mm. But everything worked out okay. I got across and to the USS Randolph, and then that was in the spring of 46, I think. 43, 44. Well, I must have been 45. I think the war was over. War was over in 45, I think. Wasn't it? I think it was. Anyway, then I was on the USS Randolph, and I had the same job to take. I worked for Rear Admiral Bogan. He was in charge of the fleet, and but we never got hit by suicide divers again. Not us. They hit a lot of other ships, but we only got hit. The one that I was on was the Randolph. Intrepid. That got hit, but when I was on the Randolph, we didn't get hit. So we finished. I was on the Randolph when the good word came that the war was over, and of course that's what we all were happy about. And so then I had been in and seen enough action, and I had been in long enough, so I had a choice. I could stay in the Marine Corps, or I could go back to Warren, Minnesota. And I decided to go back home. Mm-hmm. So we headed back then. Then in Norfolk, Virginia, that's of course on the opposite side of the United States from where we were. So then we headed for the Suez Canal. And then we went through the canal and then got to Norfolk, Virginia in November sometime. Oh yeah, November. And then they just kept pushing us that we're going home. They didn't need us no more. And then I went from there to Chicago on one train, and then and got discharged in Chicago, and then I got on the train and again went to Minneapolis. And then I got on the flyer that goes to Warren, and I was on that. So, and I had gotten in the 1st of November in 1943, and I got out in 1945. So I was in 2 years, two days lacking in 2 years. And then I was back in Minnesota again. I don't know if you can make a story out of it or not, but when we were under attack, of course you go to your battle station right away, and I forgot one thing, and that was to put cotton in my ears. So that's why I'm so hard of hearing now. I remember, and this was this wasn't on the Intrepid, the one that we got hit. This was on the Randolph, the second one, and I vaguely could remember back that my ear felt kind of funny, but I didn't think anything of it. And I went home many years, but then it was getting worse and worse, and so then I went into the VA, and they gave me hearing aids. So and of course that helped. And then now when the hearing aids went kaput, so I only got one of them left. Only one ear left. So that's why it's so hard to hear you.
Yeah. Were you married when you left for the war?
No, I wasn't 20 years old yet.
Okay. How old? You were 20 when you went into the war?
Yeah, I was I went in November, and then in April, then the next April I was 20.
Okay. How did you keep in touch with your family at home? Did you write letters?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we couldn't write much because they were all censored, and so that we couldn't say much. That all I could say is, well, I'm okay. So I can't say too much more, but it's going okay. Things are going okay, and that's about it. And Mom kept all the letters, of course. And then now Kathy has got them.
Is Kathy your daughter?
Yeah,
Okay.
she's got them. I don't remember what I wrote in those letters. I was going to look at them one day, but then, well, then it didn't. Something turned up, so I couldn't. I should look in those letters and see what I wrote. Because I just stacked one like that. Because I had a writing desk I got that's a gift, and they're all in that writing desk. And like I say, she's never looked at them either. I suppose they're waiting till I'm gone and they look at them. And person, you know, you get it does change your mind. From, you know, I had never been any farther from home than Fargo, and so I was very green, just a green kid, really. Well, I was 19 years old, but it does toughen you up, and it gives you different attitude of, because, you know, people around here on this anti-aircraft gun that I was on. It was two of us. And it just happened that he was from Chicago. And he was really a smart ass. He was just so different than me because, he'd been around. And I remember one time during the battle when we were being bombed, I was loading and he was firing. And I was holding this thing as heavy. But then as soon as that magazine got empty, I take that off and then put in a full one on. And I happened to look at him, and he was white as a sheet. He was scared too. I thought, wow, if he is scared, because he was so smart all the time, and I was really pretty dumb because I'd never been out any farther than Fargo, North Dakota from home. So I had a lot to learn. And so it did change your attitude some. Because of the different people that I was with. You put people from all over big cities, and then I come from, I was just a hay shaker coming from the country. I didn't really know what they were talking about half of the time. So it changed your attitude some, and it changed your thinking. Because I know when I got home then, it was so different. Life was so different than when I left. So it took time to get back to kind of the life that I left when I went in. Mm-hmm. But it takes time to change, and so that it was quite an experience, that's for sure. Quite an experience. And I was lucky. All I got, well, you couldn't tell by looking at me that my ears were bad, but just little ways from me buffing that wall. One of those kamikazes hit, well, gee, can you imagine what a bloody mess that was? Mm-hmm. And they were burning, and they were trying to get the fire out. I mean, the firemen did a wonderful job, but when gasoline from these Japanese planes would explode, and then they were full of gas besides, it was very, very dramatic. I mean, you were just hoping you weren't next to get hit. And I was really lucky. I didn't get directly hit, but I did lose my hearing, which I'm paying for now. But I was lucky. I didn't get physically. I never got shot or anything like that. So that I did. It was a great experience. And then the second time when I went over, after we got hit, I went back to San Francisco, and then I went home for 30 days, and went right back to San Francisco and right back overseas again. And when I went back the second time, then I went on a troop ship, which is men. And, they were young guys too. And, well, I don't know how many, but it seemed like half of them were seasick and puking all over, you know, and a ship, a troop ship, it's all steel. Everything is steel. There's no no carpet or something. Well, pretty soon you're trying, the hallways, you're trying to stand up because you're puking on the floor. They couldn't get to the toilets, they call them, in the Navy, they call them a head. You couldn't get to the head fast enough. They puke in the hallways, and then of course, that made you want to puke, you do, you know. But I was lucky I never got seasick. Just one time, between the first time that I went over from San Diego to San Francisco, and then I went on a floating dry dock, pulled by a seagoing tub. Do you follow me? And the floating dry dock was just like something, a big U, and the back end had big gates on it, so that it could take in. They'd open the gates and let the water come in, but this repair ship didn't sink. It just let water in, and then they got a ship in there, and then they would close the gates in the back, and then they had a lot of big pumps, and they'd pump all the water out, and then they could work on the part of the ship that was underwater all the time. So it took us 2 weeks to go from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor. So we got a slow start there, and then I pulled. Then I went to Pearl Harbor, Marine Corps Barracks, and then I did guard duty for prisoners. And then when that was over with, when they had got the Intrepid ready, then they just put me on that. And then it was very easy to get seasick, but oh yeah, I was on that from San Diego to Pearl Harbor the first time I was on this floating dry dock. And then, but I was sitting there one time, and I just about got sick. I was sitting there watching, and then I'd see the other side where you would go down, you could see the ocean, and then pretty soon it was up here, and I could see the sky, and it was going down, and got a nice, I started, ooh, and I looked away from it and just started doing something different, so that otherwise I would have got seasick too. But that's the closest I got to being seasick.
Yeah.
We never sat down to eat. We would just walk into the dining area, I guess you'd call it that. And if some guys were done, they were gone. You just walk over there and stand there, and they'd come and give you. One thing, we used to get a lot of scrambled eggs. I was so sick and tired of scrambled eggs. But we never sat down to eat because it took too much time then. So we just grabbed enough to eat, and then probably it'd be some fruit or something. And but we were moving all the time. We didn't stand here and eat. We were moving from this end of the area to this end, and when you got to this end, you're done, and then your plate just, or we ate off metal trays about the size of this book here, and then they just wash them and put them in a pile over here and use them over again. but we never went hungry. We always had, that was one thing about being on a ship. You did have, you got something to eat. You know, like when the Marines, I had a cousin, and he's the reason I went to the Marine Corps, because he was in Alvarado, and then he was in San Diego. So then I went. Well, he was not on a ship. He was on the ground when they took Iwo Jima, and that was an awful. We lost thousands of Marines, and he said, "You just keep running and stumbling over either a dead Marine or one that was half dead. Just keep going." You just kept going. You didn't stop. The medics, they took care of the ones that were dead or hurt. You just kept going, and you just kept going and going. You didn't stop. You just kept, because it was very, very rocky and rocks, and they were dug in real well. The Japanese were sort of, the Marines were out in the open, coming in from the boats in the water. Here they come in, here's Iwo Jima, and they just came in and landed and jumped in the water, and then they would just go and try to find Japanese and kill them. And he lived through it. He married my cousin, and they lived in Alexandria till he died. But he saw more action than I did. I saw action aboard ship, but it was altogether different. But he saw action on Iwo Jima, and he lived through it. It was just thousands of Marines that got killed there. So that was one of the worst battles, I think, in the Pacific, is Iwo. Because even to this day, once in a while, you'll see them 5 guys raising that flag. Yeah, that was Iwo Jima.
Okay.
And that was, the Marines sure took a beating on that. They took more than one island, of course, but that Iwo Jima was the worst one. Taiwan was another one. And then it was so many islands, and we only stopped one time when I was on a ship, and that's the only thing I was on. I never was on land, but we stopped for supplies in Okinawa, I think it was, and and the guys could get off if they wanted to. You got the tickets, and they could get 1 or 2 beers, bottles of beer. Well, I didn't even drink beer. I didn't want, so I just gave my tickets to some other guys that were glad to get them. But that's the only time that we were, when I was on these big ships, that we actually stopped. And we were standing still, docked. And, oh yeah, the guys are all laying up on the flight deck, sunning themselves, and I was walking around, and I was going to find a spot big enough. I was going to ride home, and gee, I saw that one guy laying over there. Sure looks like a guy that I know. I walked around, I looked down, and sure enough, here was a guy that we used to run around together before the war, and he was from Alvarado. So that was surprising. What was his name again? Can't remember his name now. that's, but the man that I worked for or took orders from was Rear Admiral Bogan. And I can still remember his name. And he was like in the bay, he had his own bedroom and so on. And I stood right outside the door. And when I wasn't there, there was a Marine there. It was always a Marine. And if he walked around, well, see, the reason what our duty was when he was sleeping, probably over here then was the what should I say, controls or so, and radio, and because that ship that we were on was the main one, and because the Admiral was there, and he made a decision, because next to us, out there a ways, was the battle wagons, or they had a lot of guns on them, and then further out would be the cruisers. They were like a battle wagon warship. And then way down, probably you could see it, furthest out was a destroyer, and that was the smallest ship. Well, like if a submarine came, you'd have to get past all those ships out there, and that probably, that one, I don't know what I was going to keep on saying, but...
Oh, that the Intrepid was in the middle, and
yeah,
it was surrounded.
yeah. See, and all those ships out there now, they were protecting the aircraft carrier, because the aircraft carrier was the one that did the most damage, because they could fly up, go over and bomb and come back and land, and then when they come back to land, and then they would go right here, like this is where I was, they would go around that ship, 2, 3 of them way up in the air, and then when their turn come, then they'd come in and then they'd drop well, this long, and then there was a hook on the end, and then on the ship there was arms that would come up like this, and then there would be some cables here and up here, and those cables were big and heavy like this. They were very, very strong, so that if they came in and we did it just right, they'd put the tail down so that hook on their plane would hook that one to these cables, and then that would stretch, and then they would stop. But sometimes they'd come too fast. They were nervous too, you know. And then it probably did hook just the last one. Well, gee, they were going too fast and slammed down, but they were safe anyway. But they probably, if the plane was probably had been hit by bullets from the Japanese or something, so that maybe his controls weren't working very good either. Well, they just take what they needed off that airplane and shove it over in the ocean. That was all. And if they weren't shot up too bad, they take parts of it and put on the other planes, so that the mechanics down in the lower areas, they would be working on to fix up the planes and so they could fly them. And so that it was, and then they had underneath, they had a tank, a gasoline tank, and that so that they could, if they could make a bigger area, because they knew that the Japanese had boats out there someplace, so they tried to find them and then try to sink them, you know. hit them with machine guns, or bomb them with, drop a bomb on them, or whatever they could, because the ocean was big, but it was a lot of activity out there. Had no, we got to know each other only through our work. And we never had a chance to go out on on drinking parties or anything like that. And because it was all the time I was in was all wartime. So we didn't have no time for visiting, really. And we slept in like the bed that I slept in was just like a frame, and strings like this, and then a canvas. That was what I slept on. And then I think it was 4 of us. One was here, and here, and here, and here, because I think I was about 3rd one or something, because we had to climb to get into bed. And it's kind of hard to remember, because it's so many years ago now, that I had a chance to go back a year ago. They had the Intrepid, the ship that I was on, was just laying there in New York Harbor, rusting up, and a man decided that ship should be fixed and honored because of what it went through it during the war. And I just was reading about it, and he organized, and of course he was a multi-millionaire. And now the Intrepid, the one that I was on, is parked, because it was parked and the sand was starting to fill around it, and they had to do something with it. So they did. They took her and fixed it up, and it is now a tourist attraction. And if you go on that ship, anytime you go on that ship, you go in the visiting room, and you look at, just keep looking at the seats. I don't know how many years in there, looking at those seats, and then you come to one, it'll say Walter R. Hillman.
How did that happen?
My good daughter sent in, I don't know, I think it was $2,400 to get my name on that chair. Isn't that nice of her?
Yes, that's amazing.